benefits of overtime. Praise him whose wars we love to fight. Praise him, fat leech and parasite. Amen.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Bougie Horror Podcast Show. I'm your host, Ellie Zara, and this is my friend, Luke St. Peter. Say hi, Luke.
Hey, everybody.
Hello, welcome back. So on the last episode, not of Dragon Ball Z, but of BHPS, we talked about the Lamb will slaughter the lion, and that actually ended up taking a bit longer than Luke and I anticipated, so we cut into 2 episodes for your listening pleasure. This time around, we're going to have a shorter episode to kind of balance things out. So we're going to have American Werewolf in London, a great 1980s film, very much remembered for its effect on how werewolves are portrayed in media and specifically in film with practical effects. So that's one of the biggest things it's remembered by. It is a horror comedy, and there are some good laughs, but mostly it's a horror movie that happens to have some laughs rather than a comedy movie that happens to have some horror, I think. So this came out in 81, so about 10 years before me. So it's a bit of an older one, but I think it's a goodie, and we'll talk about it. We got some notes on it. I do think that there's some interesting themes of being an outsider, being an outcast. I think that there's also some stuff related to Jewish identity that is going on in this film as well. The main protagonist himself is Jewish, and they don't really touch on that a lot from what I've read and what I watched. I do think part of the kind of deeper points about it are about kind of being an outsider. Even the title, of course, is American Werewolf in London, right? So it's all about being an outsider. And of course, werewolves themselves are outsiders in our society because they eat people, right? So anything else you want to say about the film? Any overall thoughts that you had, Luke, before we really dive in?
Yeah, I mean, all the points you said are valid. I also kind of think that it's interesting that it could be said that werewolves show the violence inherent in the system.
Mm.
And I do think it would be interesting to comment on how it takes violence to end violence in the film.
Right. Yeah, the whole point of the film is for David to eventually, sever the werewolf bloodline by killing himself. I mean, he's told to kill himself multiple times, and we'll get into that. But it's, like you said, it's a vicious cycle, but the cycle is supposed to end with violence. And it's not a happy ending, as you might imagine. So let's get into this. So we start with 2 Americans, right? They are David and Jack. They are on a trip. They're going through the moors of Ireland, I believe, or England. I think they start in Ireland, I want to say. Is that right, Luke? Do you remember?
It might have been Wales or something.
Yeah, could have been Wales. I actually have a friend in Wales. It's an upland area in northeastern Yorkshire, England. Cool.
Mm.
Anyway, so they're in England. They're not in Ireland. I thought like they were in Ireland and then they come to England later on. Anyway, so I want to note the soundtrack choices in this movie, right? So there's a lot, obviously, about the moon and how it makes you crazy, right? But the one at the beginning, I think, is very telling too. It's all about being alone. I have this line saying, "You saw me standing alone," and it's talking about kind of like the isolation inherent in being a monster or being an outsider in society or being seen as a monster, right? As werewolves are, and of course, in certain times in our history, Jewish people were as well, and not just Nazi Germany, of course. There's kind of this kind of connection of theme right at the beginning of the movie about being alone, feeling distant from other people, that kind of thing. It's interesting to note that they had plans to visit Italy, which is like that would have been a whole different movie, I guess. Werewolf in Italy, an American Werewolf in Italy. They are talking about this girl named Debbie Klein. I'm not a huge fan of the way that they're talking about her, but it is the 80s. So, they're making small talk about this girl that one of them likes. And they get to this place called the Slaughtered Lamb, which has a very macabre kind of symbol. And they get in there and everyone's like kind of looking at them funny. They tell this joke about a crashing plane and how, they chuck different ethnicities out and stuff like that. I didn't really laugh. Felt like a really outdated joke. But, I'm not sure it was so much about the joke itself than how out of place they feel, right?
Yeah.
And the big piece of advice that they're given is to keep clear of the moors. Luke, what did you think about some of these opening scenes? Any comments or notes from you?
I guess in some ways people might have considered the beginning a little, I guess a little run of the mill, but I still thought the acting was good. I still thought that the way they executed what could be seen as a stereotypical scene, I thought that was executed well. And overall, I like how the beginning scenes set the mood and the tone for the whole film.
Agreed, agreed. I think in general, this movie has fairly solid acting across the board. I think everybody brought, at least their B game, if not their A game. I don't really think that there are any missing pieces. I will say later on we'll meet a pair of detectives that I found more annoying than fun. I didn't think that they were nearly as funny as the director seemed convinced. They were kind of the classic bumbling stereotype. But regardless, we'll get to them later. So they kind of point out this five-pointed star, and people start getting hostile. Eventually, they leave, and they have this funny line about like, well, they weren't very nice to us, but then one of them says, "But boy, they were good at darts." So, very nice. And eventually, they're told to stay out of the moors, keep clear of the moors. I think is said to them at least two times, and to watch out for the full moon. The people back in the pub are like, "Oh, well, shouldn't we go get them? What's going to happen to them? Like, we know what might happen to them. Like, we got to do something. We can't just stand here." And, someone's like, "Well, it's murder." And someone's like, "Yeah, it's murder it is then." And they're kind of walking and they hear something, but they're like, "Nah, it's nothing." And eventually they get attacked by this beast, this creature, obviously a werewolf, and they didn't stick to the road. They somehow got turned around, ended up in the moors, and the full moon was out, so they didn't beware either of those things. And I think what's interesting here is that Jack just straight up dies, and David just runs away at first. Now I think I'm not sure. Maybe it's ambiguous. I guess because I'm saying maybe it's ambiguous. It is ambiguous. It's ambiguous to at least some extent how much David realizes how far behind Jack is. I'm not sure, and Luke, I'd love to hear your take. It felt like to me at first David was running away, kind of cowardly. I mean, I don't blame him for the record, but but then realized that he had to go save Jack and like went to go fight him. But there's another interpretation of that scene where it's like David thought Jack was right behind him. It's not like he shoved him in the way or whatever, right? He didn't like trip him up so that the werewolf was busy with him and then ran away. So I'm curious about your thoughts on this scene, Luke.
The type of person I am, I like to give people benefit of the doubt.
Sure.
So, like, I'm more inclined to say that maybe he didn't realize exactly what had happened, and that's why he had to do a second analysis of the situation. But then on the other hand, it is kind of human nature to be scared and then run from the situation.
Right. I mean, it's
So,
literally fight or flight, right? And a lot
yeah,
of people choose flight, and it's not necessarily a conscious thing. It's something you just do unconsciously to save yourself because we as human beings and pretty much every living being or animal has a kind of a survival mechanism, biologically speaking, in
yeah,
its body. And it's like, I want to live. I want to survive. I want to keep living. Right.
right.
So, anyway, regardless of whatever happened, some of the pub goers did eventually start feeling bad. They they shot the creature and and they see a man next to them instead of a wolf. So eventually David wakes up. He's in a London hospital instead of not Yorkshire anymore. And the inspector kind of tells him, "Hey, your friend died." And, the by the way, all this has already happened. We're not even 30 minutes in. I think it's important to note this is a fast paced movie. I think it's really split into like three parts, which is the attack, the first turn, and the final turn. So that's how I would characterize it. It's a pretty quick movie. It's 97 minutes, which that includes credits. So not a long movie by any means. Pretty easy watch in terms of runtime. Regardless, the inspector tells David that the locals made up some story. A lunatic got them. He's like, a lunatic has a strength of 10. I also want to note that the one of the nurses basically sexually harassed David while he was unconscious and looked at his dick, and she mentioned that he's a Jew. So that's fun. That's another reason why I'm kind of mentioning the outsider stuff and Jewish identity and stuff like that. I mean, it's brought up very briefly, but it is mentioned within the text of the film, so to speak. Regardless, the Doctor and Scotland Yard kind of come together, and like the Doctor, Scotland Yard is like, okay, here's. Oh, by the way, fun fact, I had to look this up, but I guess Scotland Yard is called Scotland Yard because the area upon which a lot of the policing came from is an area called Scotland Yard. It's not because it came from Scotland. I don't know. I think the street name or something is called Scotland Yard. Anyway, I watched this movie a while ago, so I looked that up, and I could be misremembering. But regardless, they have this kind of scene, and this is what I was talking about a little earlier. They kind of have this bumbling cop duo. Well, there's a bumbling cop and then there's a competent cop. I just don't find it that funny. I don't know, Luke, if it made you laugh or whatever, but like the one guy is always behind, a little behind the other, and kind of tripping over himself. It's very
Right.
physical comedy, which I don't mind. Sometimes I love physical comedy. I grew up watching Looney Tunes, but at the same time, I just didn't feel like it fit the overall tone of the movie. The dark comedy of Jack later on in the movie, I think, fit better. But what do you think, Luke?
Yeah, I thought something like seemed off about the bunch because at least with me, I feel like cops can be funny if they're like almost dead opposites of one another, but not quite.
Yeah.
I really didn't get that sense out of that duo.
Yeah. So they start telling him, "Oh, it's a lunatic. It's a man. It's this or that." He's like, "No, no, no. It's a beast. You got to believe me." And he says, "My memory is fine. It's my sanity I'm beginning to worry about." And he starts having werewolf dreams. There's this. I love this kid. I don't know why, but I think he reminds me of kids I've worked with. He just loves saying no to this doctor, this nurse named Alex. I don't know if you remember this kid, but I just thought he was adorable. Just keeps saying no to Alex. I have no idea if it's in the script or the kid's just that's just who the kid is, but it was very cute. Regardless, Alex the nurse and David are now our protagonists now that Jack's dead. Is kind of in the middle of a fling. They kind of have a thing for each other. It's pretty obvious. They're making like sex eyes at each other. And at one point, she's reading this book, and I don't know if you noticed this, Luke. I noticed this, and I looked it up. But Alex is reading A Connecticut Yankee, which is a time travel novel. Now, that would seem weird in a werewolf movie, but if you kind of look at the plot and stuff like that, it's all about an outsider being like it's a fish out of water story, right? It's a time travel story. So it's somebody from modern times. I believe it's written by Mark Twain, and it was turned into a movie much later on. And it's all about an outsider from the modern world and a medieval world trying to impose his ideas of what governance and politics should look like based on his modern ideals. I don't know if you caught any of that, Luke, but that stood out to me.
Yeah, I have nothing to add.
Okay. But yeah, it was a cool little nod to Mark Twain. I like that. Next up, we have the Muppets. Now, if there's ever been a cast of outsiders, the Muppets, I believe, are one of the best. But I love the Muppets, so I was very excited to see the Muppets in this movie. I believe it was just the Muppet Show. David has this dream about a death squad that kind of looked like wolves, anthropomorphic wolves. Looked like a sick death metal band, that's what I'll tell you. He has another nightmare after, and obviously he's dealing with survivor's guilt, right? Now, him having survivor's guilt raises a question of like, well, whether he ran away intentionally or not earlier. I mean, regardless, he did come back to fight off the beast and help Jack, right? So we're not going to completely villainize him one way or the other. But I do think it's interesting that he's having a lot of survivor's guilt, right? Why did I live and he didn't? A lot of this movie is about survivor's guilt because eventually Jack shows up, and I just love the prosthetics, the makeup, the practical effects of this film. That's probably my favorite part of this film. It's my favorite part with the werewolf transformation, which we'll get into in a second. And it's my favorite part of the film with Jack, who just looks great. And the actor who plays Jack does a fantastic job. I think he's one of my favorite characters, if not my favorite character. But Jack shows up and he's like, I died an unnatural death. I'm living in limbo until the wolf's bloodline must be severed. So he's basically saying, David, you got to kill yourself, bro. Like, you got to end it. I think back in our day, Luke, that would be called anheroing, but nobody says that anymore, thankfully. But either way, he's basically asking his friend to kill himself. What did you think of the scene or any of the scenes with Jack? I quite liked them.
Yeah, I really did enjoy the graphics. I do enjoy that, like over 40 years later, like I still feel like the graphics just stand up to the test of time. I mean, granted, like in this day and age, like they would be considered average, but for almost 45 years ago, I thought they were pretty good. But yeah, I thought it was kind of a weird turn that Jack was pretty straightforward on what should be done.
Yeah, it is. It is a little off-putting, maybe upsetting to some. I thought it was so funny. I thought it was funny the way he's so straightforward about it. He's like, "You got to kill yourself," and I was like, "What the fuck, man? Like, this guy was your friend. Like, I know, like, you're bitter about dying and him not dying, and maybe him abandoning you or whatever. But Jesus." But yeah, I think that's where the comedy is supposed to kind of the dark comedy. I think that's where the film excels. I'm not saying it's like amazing award-winning stuff, but I liked it overall. So yeah, so he says he's neither alive nor dead. He's stuck in limbo, and Jack tells David to kill himself. Pretty bluntly. The doctor goes to look into. So he's like, kill yourself before you kill others. And there's a line about how are you going to live, and they're like very carefully. And I forget who says that, but it's a line I wrote down. And Alex and David have this weird relationship with each other. I'm not sure if you noticed this, Luke, but she has lines of like, I find you very attractive and a little bit sad between feeling terribly sorry for you and being attracted to you. So I just like, I don't know. It just seems like she's got a thing for not bad boys, but sad boys. You know what I
Mm,
mean? Like she's got a thing for the mentally ill. She's got the will for the mentally ill, if you know what I mean.
mm.
I just made that up. I swear to God, I just made that up. But she's got the will for the mentally ill. Anyway, yeah, I don't know. This was a weird thing. They do talk about the original werewolf movie, Wolfman. I've actually seen that film. I was okay. The the effects do not hold up in that one. And the guy in that film, the protagonist, is kind of a creep. Yeah, I mean, David does just obviously just doesn't believe Jack. And there's a weird thing where the director regrets A, that the sex scene wasn't more explicit, and B, that the werewolf transformation didn't last, or it did last as long as it did. And I disagree on both points, by the way. Not because I'm against sex scenes, but just because I thought the way it was shot was fine. But Alex and David eventually have sex in the hospital. Security in there is not great, apparently. I thought it was fine the way it was shot. I think both of the director's regrets on the movie, which I don't know, seem pretty minor, are just kind of like overblown. Like it just seemed fine. You didn't need to do any more than that. We got the point. We already knew that they wanted to fuck each other, so like whatever. So
Right.
anyway, the doctor looks into David's story. They have this kind of whole small town esque vibe of everybody knows about the secret. And as David's getting out of the hospital with Alex, the dogs are barking at David and the cats are hissing, of course, because he's a werewolf. And they play the song "Bad Moon Rising" or "Riding," and that was another banger on the soundtrack. And then eventually we find that David is not very hungry, and we get to the transformation scene. Is there anything I missed in your notes before we get to this? Because this is a big scene. I want to spend a few minutes on it.
I really don't have any big notes that stand out from what you said already. I just want to make one note. It was "Bad Moon Rising" by Creedence Clearwater Revival.
Yes, yes, absolutely, and that's a classic.
Oh yeah, for sure.
It's a great song. Yeah, this soundtrack's a banger. It's just banger after banger, and it's thematically appropriate banger after banger. That's what I really appreciate because anybody can throw a good song on their soundtrack, but it's gotta make sense with the fucking movie.
Right.
Um, but anyway, so that was good. We get to the transformation scene. Luke, I fucking love this scene. This is so good. This is the best part of the movie. I don't know what the director is thinking this should have been any longer or any shorter. It is perfect the way it is. This is one of the best transformation scenes, I would argue, in all of cinema, let alone all of horror movies. It's just done so well. The acting is so good. Like I said, the makeup, the practical effects are so well done. The actor for David just acts his fucking heart out. Just moaning, groaning, and yelling. It's just really good. I'm curious about your take on this transformation scene. I absolutely loved it. I think it holds up really well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it holds up splendidly. I like how the movie came out nearly a full decade before either one of us were born.
Right.
And even so, it still stands up to the test of time today as far as what they were capable of doing compared to what they actually came out with. Like that kind of ratio is kind of hard to come by these days.
Absolutely. And I was just about to comment on that. It's swinging back the other way. I think in the late 90s, early 2000s, you had this wave of CGI where people are like, oh, computer graphics are the future, and that's what we got really invested in. Even George Lucas, who loved practical effects in the original trilogy, started really stuffing the Phantom Menace and Attack of the Clones and even Revenge of the Sith had a lot of CGI. And even I remember as a kid that he was bringing out the original trilogy now with enhanced CGI. And it just felt so out of place, right? Because you have all these physical effects and props and, cool makeup or whatever. And it's like suddenly like a fucking Wampa or whatever would come out of nowhere that wasn't in the original scene. And you can tell. But I feel like we're going back the other way now. The pendulum's starting to swing back towards the center. I'm not always a centrist, but I think on this one I am. I like that we're getting more practical effects. Now, not everything needs to be practical. Sometimes there are people out there like Tom Cruise, or I'm like, bro, I think it's okay if you do one fucking stunt that involves computer graphics. You know what I mean? Like, obviously it
Right.
does to some extent, but you know what I mean? There are some people who go too far in that direction and everything's practical. And some of it just doesn't hold up for one reason or another, right? There is a time and a place for computer graphics when it comes to movies or entertainment. So, and some people have got it into their heads, oh, practical effects are a lost art. We need to bring it back and we need to go like 20 times harder. It's like I love practical effects. And I think, for example, like The Fly, right, from the 1980s with Jeff Goldblum,
Yeah.
another great movie with really good practical effects. But not every movie needs to be like that, right? There are great movies, excellent horror movies that have come out with a lot of CGI in them that don't rely on practical effects. I think you can have it both ways. Anyway, thank you for coming to my TED Talk. I just want to praise the shit out of this, though. This is really good. If you see one thing from this movie, make it the transformation scene. Anyway, so interestingly, he doesn't. So in a lot of werewolf media, and I'm not sure if you noticed this, Luke, based on tropes and stuff, but in a lot of werewolf media, you have to actually see, or at least have to be outside and in the presence of a full moon, right? But that's not how it works in this movie's lore. In this movie's lore, as long as the full moon's out, you're going to turn into a werewolf, which makes sense, right? Why the fuck would you have to see the moon for the moon to exist, right? It's kind of a if a tree falls kind of situation, right? If a tree falls in the forest and no one's
Yeah.
around, it doesn't make any sound kind of situation. But the movie says, yes, it actually does make a sound. You just don't hear it, right? Which I think is probably true. Anyway, so David starts turning, even though he's not outside, even though he's not looking directly at the moon, or the camera's not pointed at the moon, right?
Yeah.
We get some shots of the moon, but beforehand to know that it's a full moon. But yeah, he ends up killing some people in the subway. This poor guy who's trying to run away just can't make it, and he wakes up later in a zoo. This was a pretty funny scene. It wasn't really dark comedy, but it was kind of funny. He wakes up in a zoo. He's sleeping next to wolves, of course. He's running around naked, and he gives a kid 2 pounds for a balloon. He's kind of in the bushes, and he's like trying to cover up and shit. And he's like, hey, I'll give you like if you give me that balloon, I'll give you 2 pounds. I'm like, this is the sketchiest shit I've ever seen in my life. I can't remember if the kid actually agrees or not. I think he does, but I'm not sure. I think he has to be convinced into it. He's like, my mom tells me I'm not supposed to talk to strangers, yada yada. But yeah, he puts the balloons around him, and then he steals a woman's coat, and then it's like, haha, man's wearing a woman's coat, haha, whatever. And then the kid says to his mom, a naked American man stole my balloons. And of course, the mom's like, okay, sure. And yeah, we get to this point where, David's saying a lot of weather we've been having lately, right? As people are looking at him because of his odd choice of attire, but he's covered up completely with this coat. Luke, anything you had to say about these scenes before we get back into Alex and David?
Uh, no, I have no major comments.
Okay. Next up is Alex looking kind of silly. She doesn't
Okay.
really ask a lot of questions. Now, maybe it's because they're in the honeymoon phase and they just met each other and they're in love, or they or they have a lot of connections or whatever, but she's not really asking any questions of, why was he in a zoo? Why was he next to some wolves? Why anything? And a line that I like here is him saying, I haven't felt this good in a long time. And it's kind of about, I mean, you could link this to a lot of things, right? Accepting who you are as a person or feeling more self-assured or confident about yourself. I said it like relates to identity and themes about of inner repression and feeling like you're okay even though society tells you you're not. In this situation, obviously he's killing people. He's not really killing people because he doesn't really have control over himself, right, when he's a werewolf, but he does have control over himself before he becomes a werewolf, right? Like he could kill himself or could put himself in such a situation that he wouldn't be able to break out. So David's like, okay, I guess this is right. This is true. I'm gonna get out of this cab. I'm not gonna go see these police officers or detectives or whatever. I'm gonna get myself arrested immediately. What if I turn while I'm on the way? Yeah, so David goes to Trafalgar Square and he basically tries to get himself arrested. And you know what? In a movie full of werewolves and people getting bitten and transforming and dead people coming to life and limbo and shit, this was the most unrealistic part of the movie. I don't know about you, Luke, but bro absolutely straight up harassed a bunch of people, including a police officer to his face. And the officer would not arrest David. I thought this was ludicrous. There's no way that in real life he would not have been arrested for what he did. Like he didn't
Well,
physically harm anybody, but he absolutely like was being rude and vulgar and just like crass all around.
well, well. I mean, in all fairness, though, we are accustomed to American police. Just because our police are like that doesn't mean everybody else's are.
I guess so. I mean, to me, a cop is a cop, but yeah, I guess you're right. There might be cultural. He does get close. There might be cultural reasons why he does get close to getting arrested, but the cop just eventually tells him to get lost. So David calls his family, tells them that he loves them, tries to slit his wrist with a pocket knife, and then just doesn't. It can't do it because he loses his nerve. And then he spots Jack in the movie theater. This is probably one of my favorite scenes in the movie when they're kind of in an adult movie theater, so there's a porno going on. Jack looks fucking terrible at this point. He's mostly bones. And I love that over the course of the movie, the makeup actually changes with how much time it's been and how much the decomposition is happening. I don't know if decomposition happens, this quickly or whatever, but it's still a fun thing. It's a fun kind of conceit to show that more time has gone by. And, they're arguing about whether David is responsible or not. We already talked about that. Is he really
Uh,
responsible for killing the six people, including, not including Jack, right?
right,
Because, when he turns into the werewolf, he doesn't have control. But at the same time, he has control over whether he's still living or not when he's not the werewolf. So is he
right.
responsible for these deaths or not? Luke, did you have any thoughts about that or anything in the movie
But
theater?
yeah, actually, I feel like the scene in the movie theater is like the perfect blend of both the comedic and the horrific aspects of the horror comedy. I feel like the way the actors present themselves is a little bit like the makeup expresses the horror, but the way the actors present their acting, I feel is a little bit on the comedic side of the horror comedy.
Right. And part of the comedic part is, again, him being bluntly told that he needs to kill himself.
Yep.
And the other victims start appearing and saying, David, you have to die. You must die, David Kessler. And they ring off a bunch of ideas about how he should kill himself. Now, for my money, Luke, and I want to know your thoughts as well, very important question. I thought that either dying by the subway or the gun was the best. Most instant, least. By the way, very important note, we're not advocating suicide, but we're just having a discussion about it within the context of a film. Very important to clarify that. Anyway, I thought of the options that they listed that jumping into the subway would be a pretty safe bet. You get crushed. I'm pretty sure that you wouldn't survive. And there's almost no chance that David would live through that, right? And
Right.
subways, even when they're about to enter the station, are still going pretty fucking fast.
Yeah.
And if you didn't die from that, you might die from like the third rail or whatever, right?
Right.
So But the other idea they had a bunch of ideas, but the two ideas I liked were the train and the gun, which I mean, a lot of people kill themselves like that, right? They put it up to their temple, or they put it up to the through the throat.
Right.
So I don't know. What did you feel? If you remember any of the other methods, let me know. But those two I thought were like the most surefire way with the least amount of pain and like the least expensive too. At least the tube one, that's what they call it
Yeah.
in the UK for people who don't know. I thought the tube idea probably the best, but anyway, what did you think?
What I thought about just the best methods overall was that they tend to be a little more on the violent end.
Yeah,
Like killing yourself with a gun, that's a lot more violent than overdosing on pills for
right.
the same result. But they chose a gun. I think it does kind of speak to the violence that comes with the othering effect. I mean, sometimes it's not literal violence like what we see in the movie. Sometimes it's more of a subtle type of thing.
Right. Yeah, there's a big difference in the way, stereotypically speaking, that men commit suicide and women commit suicide. Women often a lot more quote unquote softer methods of killing yourself, drugs, and generally just drugs. I struggle to think of anything else. Whereas with men, it's usually a lot more violent, throwing themselves into something or guns or, jumping or whatever. Out of context, this sounds like a horrible conversation, but in context, I thought it was hilarious. But I also have a very morbid sense of humor. It's literally gallows humor, and I like it.
Right.
Regardless, the eventually he starts transforming. He kills the detective. There's a British woman. I love her. She's absolutely losing her shit. I don't know who this extra was, but I hope they paid her well because she acts her fucking ass off for this werewolf. And she just screams and yells and cries, and it's great. He eventually kills the detective, tears his head off. There's a huge traffic accident, which is kind of comedic in a sense of it's like Final Destination-esque, honestly. How many people just fucking end up dying? Alex comes to David, goes through the police and stuff like that, tells him that
Yeah.
she loves him, which is wild because they've only known each other for, I don't know, tops like a week or two. But anyway,
Right.
but I mean, so who am I to judge, right? I told I loved her in first month or something. So who am I to judge? But anyway, for a split second, David comes back too. And these rifles have some good fucking aim because he lunges and they immediately like headshot him and he's dead. Yeah, I mean, it's a bit of a bummer, but that's kind of the ending. I don't know if you have any thoughts on anything else left in the theater or outside of the theater, but if you do, here's your chance.
I think everything was covered.
Great. Yeah, and I'm, I know we don't have a ton to say about this movie. We just really wanted to see it just because it's a classic and it's got some great makeup effects. There's not a ton of social themes here, but I think you could look into it and you could see stuff about especially Jewishness. Like for example, on the Wikipedia, it says Joshua Rothkopf, writing on the 35th anniversary of the film's release, called it an allegory of exoticized Jewishness, which is embodied by the character of David and his growing awareness of his otherness as a werewolf, alongside his outsider status as a Jewish American in England. Quote, hiding a secret deep within one's body, strange urges, xenophobic glances, accusatory feelings of guilt, David's condition already has a name, and this won't be the first film in which Jewish otherness is made monstrous. Yeah, I mean, this is a great film in terms of thinking about others and being othered. We're going to talk more about that kind of trope when we talk about Frankenstein and we talk about Dracula, the books. More so Frankenstein than Dracula, I think.
Yeah.
Frankenstein's more of a victim and Dracula's more of a predator, right?
Yeah.
Uh, but either way, they're still about otherness in a sense because they're monsters, right? All monster films are about otherness to some extent.
Yeah.
I guess one last note I want to make is that Michael Jackson loved the prosthetics so much. You may recognize, even without have seen this movie before, the werewolf effects. And that's because Michael Jackson chose John Landis to direct and Rick Baker, the guy who did all the makeup effects, for his 1983 Thriller music video. Now, these days, I'm not sure if you'd want that on your resume, but nonetheless, that's kind of a cool little cultural lineage that this movie has in a way, because that's one of the most popular music videos of all time. Of course, it's very popular Halloween songs, and we're either in or past the spooky season, depending on when you're listening to this. So yeah, a pretty good film. I don't even think it's a great film, honestly. I know I've praised it a lot, I actually don't like it. Didn't like enthrall me. I was mostly there for I had seen it before, so I was mostly there for the effects. I was there for the, kind of themes of otherness and any other philosophical stuff I could get out of it, and then the dark comedy. And I got those. I was pretty well satisfied. But everything else, the straightforward comedy, the writing, the acting, it's all good, but none of it's like you're not going to really remember a lot of it, except for a couple of
Yeah.
scenes. So that was my
Gotcha.
overall thoughts on it. Luke, any last comments you have on An American Werewolf in London?
Overall, say it's a good film. As stated before, the graphics really stand out as kind of like stand out as solid, even 4+ decades later. Overall, I felt like kind of reminds me of a line that the director was told in the credits when he first proposed the movie. It's too funny to be a horror film and too horrific to be a comedy film. And yet, everybody who enjoys the film enjoys that aspect of the film.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
One thing I just randomly remembered a minute ago that I thought was interesting. I was watching the extras, and they said they ended up using the sounds of 11 different animals that come out with the growl for the werewolf.
Oh, interesting. Yeah,
Yeah.
that makes sense to me. I mean, the sound is really messed up when you hear it in the I mean, it sounds like nothing really that I've ever heard before. When I remember hearing it for the first time, I was like, well, that's distinctive. So
Right?
it makes sense that it's honestly just a bunch of cobbled things together. Yeah, sound work is very interesting when you're trying to do, monster flicks or horror video games or anything really, because that audio design is such a big part of it. But
Yeah.
anyway, I know this is a shorter episode. We didn't have as much to say as we were hoping. We actually had a lot more to say about Tales of the Hood, which is very funny to me. But but regardless, this was a pretty good film. Absolutely go out of your way to at least watch it once, probably with some friends, but you could probably watch it by yourself and have a good time. It's a 90-minute film. It's an easy watch, so I recommend at least watching it once. I think I watched it on YouTube if I remember correctly. So go check it out on YouTube. It might be streaming elsewhere. I don't know. We're not sponsored by anybody. So go do some research. And yeah, I want to thank everybody for joining us. Next episode, we are going to be talking about Frankenstein, this little indie hit you might have heard of, written by Mary Shelley. And I'm very excited to talk about that. I have never read Frankenstein, so this will be my first time. We hopefully will just be splitting it into one episode and not two, but we'll see how that goes. That didn't end up happening with our Lovecraft book, but that was also 372 pages instead of 200 or so. So we'll see how that goes. 258, it seems. But yeah, I want to thank everybody for watching. Take care, everybody. I hope Spooky Month was great for you, and we will talk to you soon.
Talk to you soon.